I have known since the age of 15 that I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't know what kind of journalist, but it turned out that I became a photojournalist, although I'm not a photographer. It's been my privilege to work for great publications throughout my life. I first worked for Life magazine all through World War II, and that's where I learned something about handling pictures. My job at Life was to go out and get pictures and also to assign photographers as the assistant to the picture editor. But I also began to learn something about choosing pictures, sometimes from the mistakes that the editors would make. Sometimes the photographers always thought the editors chose the wrong pictures. But anyway, I think the editors did a great job in general. And then later, after Life, I worked for the greatest American women's magazine called Ladies' Home Journal. It was great fun, and it was perhaps the easiest job of my life. And then I went to the hardest job of my life, which was trying to run Magnum. Capa came to New York for the holidays in 1952 and said, "It's time for you to join us." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we're paying our New York bureau chief $6,500 a year, and we'll double that if you'll come with us." And I said, "I don't see any gain in that. I'm making more money than that already at Ladies' Home Journal." But he said, "But you'll get to come to Paris." So I agreed. So for the next 8 years, I tried to run Magnum as the international executive editor, the only one who ever had responsibility for both New York and Paris offices. The French rather resented me, but they went along with it, even Cartier-Bresson, with whom I learned to work very closely and whom I also came to love. I was one of Magnum's first customer in America, but I knew all the founders of Magnum even before they knew each other. I first met Bill Vanderbilt, who dropped out of Magnum after the first year. In 1937, when I was still a student at the University of Chicago, I published a photograph by Robert Capa of the Spanish Civil War in 1937. In the student magazine I edited called Pulse. But I first met Capa in the winter of 1939 to 40, and I was soon adopted into his family. Robert Capa was perhaps a spoiled child. His mother certainly tried to spoil him. I didn't spoil him, but I loved him. I used to call him my Hungarian brother. I loved his mother, Julia, his brother, Cornell, and I spent many, many hours in their company. It was up to me to help them arrange the funeral when Bob died. I'll never forget that day, May 25th, 1954. I awakened that morning in a small hotel in Mexico, Missouri. Mexico is a little industrial town on the Mississippi River. I had just finished teaching a Missouri workshop. And when I awakened that morning, it was by a phone call from Inga Bondi of Magnum, New York, saying, "John, I have terrible news. Werner Bischoff is dead." Werner and his wife, Rosalina, had just visited my wife and me in Armonk at Christmas. And I knew that Rosalina was pregnant, and indeed she delivered a child later that day. And I was very concerned about that. When I got home, I flew to New York later that afternoon. And when I got home, the phone was ringing, and it was a Life researcher saying, "I suppose you've heard the news. Werner Bischoff is dead." may I ask you some questions? And then she began asking me questions about Kappa. I said, why Kappa? Oh, I guess you haven't heard the news. He died today. He stepped on a landmine. It was just too much for one day. I've been asked what it is that attracted me to photojournalism. I think, first of all, it was a love of photographers. I think of photographers, and I have known thousands, as sort of as children. Even the great ones, they are the great children. It's these experiences, living so close to photographers, that have endeared me to photojournalism. That's why my book is called A Personal History of Photojournalism. I love photographers, and I guess they love me. That's the nice thing about writing about them.